Thank you very much, and hello again. Indeed, before the break, at the beginning of the session, that is, before 2 breaks ago, I already talked about research ethics as one of the methods, as we call them, that we developed for AI and robotics. So as far as we can see, there have been ethics guidelines issued by various international organizations, as well as national ones, but not really research ethics guidelines or a framework for research ethics. So this is what we're offering here today, and let us proceed. So the context indeed is that in recent years, we have seen the development of guidelines and frameworks for AI in the area of ethics. We have, for example, the AI high-level expert group that has developed ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, as they call it. We have the OECD having developed ethics guidelines, IEEE, and various other organizations. These three, I would say, are the most important ones at an international level, although I should add that very recently, UNESCO has also published global ethics guidelines for AI. So none of these guidelines, in our view, can constitute research ethics guidelines. They are multi-stakeholder. They are more at the societal level than at the level of research and development. Maybe a bit less so for IEEE guidelines, but even there we have a feeling that they're a little bit broader than just for research and development, although they have certainly been inspirational for us. So how do we develop research ethics guidelines for AI? So we have done so, first of all, by using the kind of high level or general ethics guidelines or requirements, as they are also called, from the AI high level expert group. We could have also used OECD or IEEE, but as we have argued in our SIENNA work, these guidelines are almost equivalent. They pretty much harbor the same ethics principles. So the kind of framework that we develop, although it uses the high-level expert group ethics requirements, it's compatible with other general guidelines that could also have been used. So we want to use those ethics requirements of the AI high-level expert group, there are 7 of them, as a basis for formulating ethics guidelines for research and development. So that involves a translational process. Then we think those general guidelines, even when translated to the R&D level, they're still rather general. They don't say much about specific AI and robotics products or techniques or application domains. And we hold that you get more nuance and detail if you also either produce guidelines or at least ethical case studies of specific AI and robotics products, techniques, and application domains. So that's what we also recommend. And fourth, we add our ethics by design approach, which Brandt will be discussing in the next presentation, as a recommended method to use for implementing the research ethics guidelines. So implementation is always an issue with ethics guidelines, and ethics by design is a very helpful tool in that respect. So let's take a look at high-level expert group requirements or guidelines. We adapted them a little bit based on our SIENNA research. So they look similar, but slightly different for some of them. For example, we moved the oversight requirement which was originally coupled by them to human agency. We moved that to accountability, where we think it belongs more properly. Also in line with current EC policy, we dropped the technical robustness and safety requirement as an ethics requirement that is now being assessed also in the New Horizon program under the scientific evaluation, not the ethics assessment. So then we have in place 6 general ethics requirements for AI. And so these 6 then need to be brought to an operational level for research and development. And for this, we have developed a proposal. So basically, what we have done is we looked at the more general requirements, and we said, how can those be operationalized with respect to research and development for AI in such a way that they pertain specifically to the products, techniques, and practices of research and development. That involves several steps, and what we're offering right now is a minimally technical description of these kind of lower level or operational guidelines. So starting with human agency, that involves the values of autonomy, dignity, and freedom. We here hold that AI applications should be designed to give humans control of the system as much as possible, both end users and other stakeholders. AI should also not try to control people or enable such control by others, which means that AI systems should not make choices or make decisions that are quintessentially personal, communal, or political. So some decisions that people make, they're highly personal, or they are normally decisions made by communities or in political processes. And those are the kinds of decisions that we argue shouldn't be made by AI. AI systems should not remove basic freedoms, including freedom of movement, freedom of expression, etc. They should not subordinate, coerce, deceive, or manipulate people, or stimulate dependency or addiction. And these things can be further operationalized. Privacy and data governance. I'm going here quickly because this is probably familiar terrain for many of you. AI must, of course, respect the right to privacy. AI's use of data must be actively governed. There should be adherence to the GDPR, at least in the European Union. Data usage should be auditable by humans. And there are some further requirements that relate to being able to withdraw consent, for example, or security measures that should be in place. Then there's an important fairness requirement that also has to do with non-discrimination and diversity, which implies in general terms that people should be given equal rights and opportunities in as far as that can be guaranteed by the design of the system, and should not be disadvantaged or advantaged undeservedly. That's the more general formulation. More specifically, you get avoidance of algorithmic bias in input data modeling and algorithmic design. So we have a more detailed statement on what that all entails. You get requirements of universal accessibility of systems, as well as, and as far as they can be anticipated, fair consideration that impacts of the system are fair. Then there's a requirement for individual social and environmental well-being, which includes first that AI systems should not harm individual social or environmental well-being, and as far as that can be predicted, of course, in relation to the design, that they should consider therefore the welfare of stakeholders. There should be a documented effort to consider environmental impacts of systems. There should be special consideration of AI systems that are being developed for applications towards media, communications, politics, social analytics, or online communities. These systems, as we have seen, there are significant ethical issues having to do with the quality of communication, fake news, filter bubbles, echo chambers, and political manipulation. So those types of systems require extra ethical consideration. We have a transparency requirement that to the extent that it's relevant, it's not equally relevant for each type of system or application, that humans must be able to understand how the AI functions and how the decisions are arrived at. We have the best practice of explainable AI, traceability of AI systems during the life cycle, and it must be clear to end users that they are interacting with an AI system, for example, when they use a chatbot. Also, open communication of the AI system's purpose, capabilities, limitations, and risks. Record keeping, all these things are increasingly important, we think. Accountability and oversight also includes several more specific requirements for research and development. Taking responsibility for actions and effects of the system to the extent that they are, of course, predictable. Developers must be able to explain how and why a system acts the way it does, how undesirable effects will be detected, stopped, and prevented from reoccurring. There might be a need for a formal ethical risk assessment, and there is a need for mechanisms to address oversight. And auditability of systems is also something we recommend. So these are then ethics requirements that can be used then as ethics guidelines in research assessments. We advocate the addition of an ethics by design component as a methodology for proactively integrating these ethical requirements into the design process. So you can actually use them as design requirements or requisites in the design process. And we then also recommend adding more specific guidelines for special types of systems, techniques, data, applications, and user groups, depending on how elaborate you want your guidelines to be. So here are some special issues for which you may want to have special guidelines, like ethically aware AI, fully autonomous AI, deep learning techniques, analysis of speech, text, and internet behavior, predictive analytics in relation to persons and their behaviors, different kinds of application domains, etc. So finally, these are research ethics guidelines for AI. We have also developed in a previous project research ethics guidelines for computer science. And we argue that these AI guidelines could, in principle, be incorporated in these broader computer science guidelines. And I think I'll end it here. Thank you very much.